Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehiiv.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. The word coach is closely aligned with sport, but it's becoming ever more synonymous with the corporate world. More and more people are employing experienced professionals to provide career coaching. Sometimes that coach is a colleague, and sometimes it's an outsider bringing fresh advice and insights. And that's exactly what today's guest, Theresa Smith, does for her clients. Theresa is the founder of LeaderSmith, a company providing executive coaching and leadership development coaching for all levels. This includes emerging leaders right up to the C-suite. And Theresa has a tremendous amount of wisdom to impart. Her media career started in print sales with the Financial Post before pivoting into digital with CANOE and MSN Canada. Most people familiar with Theresa's story will recognize her from Olive Media, where she served as VP of Product, General Manager in VP, and President. Theresa Smith stops by to chat about growing up in Strathroy, competitive figure skating, why she studied history in university, the culture shock that came with teaching English in Japan, her media sales career, both leading and sunsetting Olive Media, and how the LeaderSmith is shaping a new generation of leaders.
At the LeaderSmith, we're focused on executive coaching and leadership development for leaders at all levels, from emerging leaders to really the C-suite. This is my passion. This is my baby. I love it. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. It's what I was put here to do.
Theresa, thank you so much for dropping by today. As always, we go back to the beginning. You're from Strathroy, Ontario. So tell everyone where Strathroy is, because I don't think some people would be familiar with it on the map.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, Victor, how many people know Strathroy. Honestly, I always go with the assumption that people don't. And I want to say 90% of the time, people are like, oh, yeah, I know that. I've got a cousin there or something like that. But Strathroy is a small town in southwestern Ontario. It's about halfway between London and Sarnia. When I grew up there, it was about 7,000 people. It's probably about 15,000 people now.
Would you call it, say, a suburb of London? Like, I was looking at it on a map before we started, and I don't know, coming from someone who has always lived in the Greater Toronto area for most of his life, it seems like even 50 kilometers out is considered suburbia for Toronto. Was that the case with Strathroy, or was it kind of its own small town with its own character?
Definitely its own small town with its own character. I would call it maybe today a sleeper town. But it was a pretty rural town surrounded by like a really amazing farmland. So it really had its own vibe, its own feel, separate from London.
Did you grow up on a farm?
I did not, but I also did not grow up in town. So my address growing up was a rural route. So my address was RR7 Strathroy. So I grew up just outside of town, but not on a farm.
Overall, what was life like growing up in Strathroy? Because I believe you spent most of your life there before university.
Yeah. I was born and raised in Strathroy, and I lived there until I went off to university at 18. And honestly, it was pretty amazing. I mean, it was a small town. Both my parents were born and raised in Strathroy, in the Strathroy area. It was a good community. It was safe. I had a big family, extended family, a lot of cousins. I felt like it was a safe place. It was a friendly place. I loved growing up in a small town, actually.
Your interest in hobbies. Let's start with the first one, horses. How did you fall in love with horses, and like what was your exposure to them? How are they part of your day-to-day life?
Oh yeah, it's funny. My office is got horses all over the place. I'm looking at a picture right now on the wall in my office here, and it's my grandfather, my Grandpa Smith, with a colt. And really, he was my introduction to horses. Um, he had a farm, and he and my grandma had a number of horses. And I mean, he was a lover of horses. He was like a cowboy, really, if there's such a thing in southwestern Ontario. And I just got that love for horses from him. And I was obsessed with them as a kid. I read all the Black Stallion books. You know, we spent a summer out in Alberta when I was a kid, and my dad would take us to like a horseback riding place, and we would ride horses through the foothills. And when I graduated from grade 8, and this is going to sound really shishy, and let me assure you, it is not, I got a horse for my grade 8 graduation. And so, yeah, that was kind of like the culmination of my obsession and my love for horses, was to have my own horse and care for it and ride it. And, you know, that took me into high school, and then you get really distracted and busy with other things. So I had that for a couple of years. I've always loved horses, but I haven't owned any horses since then.
This might be a silly question, but did the family have a barn or a stable at home so you could have the horse there, or was the horse kept at another stable and you would drop by daily to visit it?
Yeah, great question, and not at all silly. We did not have a barn or a stable because I didn't live on that kind of property or farm. Initially, the horse stayed at my grandpa's, which was probably about a, I don't know, 8-minute car ride from my house. And I would visit it there. And if I wasn't there, he was taking care of it. And then we moved it to the farm that was directly across the road from my house. And these were close family friends. And so it boarded there. This was not what I would call stables. It was actually, so, you know, when I say it's not shishi, it was a cow field across the street, with a barn. And they had a donkey in the field with the cows and my horse. And so I would be able to just walk across the street and go and visit it there and feed it and brush it and ride it on occasion, and always see it.
Do you think that gave you a different sense of responsibility from, say, your peers that had like dogs or cats? Because horses are a big undertaking compared to them if you're looking at them from the perspective of pets.
Mm, interesting question. I don't know that it had an impact in the way that you might be suggesting. I think the impact was a much more spiritual one. Like a connection, horses are like incredibly perceptive. They are incredibly attuned to us as humans. And so I think there was more of a connection around that, um, deeper than it was the responsibility. I was always a very responsible person, kid. I am the eldest of four. And so was always taking a lot of responsibility. So I don't think the horse necessarily introduced that or necessarily amped it up, but there was just a sense of peace and connection that, I had with my horse's name was Sunday, that I didn't have with the other pets, and there were many in our house.
How did you get into competitive figure skating?
You know, it's a small town, Victor. And in a small town, there are, you know, few things to do. And, you know, my parents were both athletes. They're both active people. They were both active as young people. And I played baseball. I was put in skating, and I was just a pretty good athlete all around. So, you know, I was half decent in both of those sports, and I just carried through with the figure skating. You know, it's an individual sport more than it is a team sport, though there is a team aspect to some of the skating that I did. And that's really where a lot of discipline and I want to say responsibility came into play. I was good at it. It was accessible to me. I had a lot of fun doing it. So, you know, I carried it through until I was basically going off to university.
What was it like training, though, for your first jump or your first axel? Like, I mean, I know nothing about figure skating from what I see on the Olympics every 4 years, but something that is really interesting about any sort of sport like figure skating or gymnastics is that the first time you take a leap, chances are you're not going to land on your feet. The same way someone swings a bat for the first time, they're not going to miss, they're probably going to miss the baseball, but there are greater repercussions for not landing that axle or falling off of a balance beam than there are just striking out at baseball. So what was that part like of your training?
Victor, when I think about it today, I think it's bonkers. I think I
Okay,
can't imagine putting my kids on the ice to do those things without a helmet on. Like, it's just like, what were we doing?
good point. No
Um,
helmets. Yeah, I didn't even think about
yeah,
that.
no helmets. And like, you're in the air and you're right, you're moving at quite a clip and you hit the ground, and it's not the ground, it's actually less forgiving than the ground, it's ice. Um, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember my first jump. And maybe that's because there were so freaking many. I mean, it is a really repetitive practice, right? You're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, trying to perfect something. I remember practicing axles. I remember falling a lot. And then you start landing. And then it feels really good. And then you're on to the next thing, which is a double something or other until you come back around to a double axle. And then you're kind of back where you began.
At what point did you decide to hang up your skates? Did you look at what you were doing and say, okay, I don't think I'm going to go to the Olympics, or maybe you were good enough to go to the Olympics, but maybe you didn't like the training. And just for reference, I went to a high school that had a pool, and because we had a pool in Mississauga, a lot of the Olympic hopefuls would study at the school and swim at the pool as well too, just because it was very convenient for them because they were doing it early mornings and late evenings. And what I learned from them was is that they got to a certain point in high school where they knew that they were either going to go all the way, plateau, or nothing was going to happen. So they had to make that decision for themselves to say, am I passionate enough to and happy enough to be where I am in my swimming career? Like, did you have that moment as well?
100%. Let's just be clear. I was not Olympic material. I was competitive, but I wasn't Olympic. And in fact, there was a point, probably mid high school, early high school, maybe, when my parents, like, it's an investment. Figure skating is an expensive sport. You know, you've got a couple of pairs of skates, you got a couple of sets of blades, you've got a lot of clothing, you know, you've got a lot of expense in pro fees, right? Your coaching fees, not to mention your memberships and all these things. It's an expensive sport. And so there was a point when I was in early high school, my parents were like, yeah, so you're probably not going anywhere with this. So maybe we should just call it a day. And I was like, what? Are you for real? No way. No way. And I think it wasn't because I had any dreams of being some super competitive Olympic skater or anything, but it was because that was community for me. And it was how I spent my time. I didn't go to the mall after school. I didn't hang out at somebody's house in the basement, you know, drinking beer or making swill from, you know, multiple bottles on somebody's parents' bar. I was at the rink, and those were where my people were. And I didn't want to give that up. And so I did that until, this is how old I am, Victor, I was heading into grade 13. And, you know, I really wanted to focus my energies a little bit more on school. And at that point, I stepped away from my individual skating. I remained on what was called precision skating, a precision skating team at the time, skated out of Ilderton. A lot of people who follow the Olympics might recognize Ilderton as a skating club. A lot of well-known Olympic skaters come out of Ilderton. But I skated on a team there for my final year of high school. And then I hung up my blades from that point of view, with the exception of a little bit of rec skating, like recreational skating, and I picked up a hockey stick in university, but I also taught skating. I taught skating from the time I was about 11 or 12. I taught skating to new skaters, beginner skaters, and that was a part-time job that I had in university. I went to Western, and I taught adult beginner skaters at Western University.
So it sounds like your parents staged some sort of athlete intervention. Like literally, that's what it sounds
I
like. They
think
have the
they were
situ-
trying to save money. They were trying to save money. Like, let's
but
call a spade a spade. They were
But
like, okay, yeah, this is great and everything, but this is costing us a lot. It may be time for you to find something a little less expensive.
you know what? And just to throw it out there, I also had grade 13, and a lot of those peers I referenced that were swimmers, that's when they started to withdraw themselves from swimming. That's when they decided to kind of hang up their trunks if they weren't going all the way to the Olympics. It was usually around grade 12, just to make time for their academics in their grade 13, just so they could go to university or at least have the grades to get
Yeah.
in. Let's talk about your influences, though. A couple of interesting ones that I want to go through. So the first one is, why your parents?
Oh gosh, I always have been very close with my parents. I feel like so fortunate to have, are you a parent, Victor?
I am not a parent, no.
Okay, okay. I'm a parent. I know that we're winging it all the time. Like most of us don't really know what we're doing. We're just doing our best. And my parents were children when they had me. Basically, my mom was dropped out of high school and had me when she was 17, and my dad was 21. They were kids. They certainly didn't know what they were doing. But I grew up in a household that was full of love. I was incredibly supported. I was raised to believe that I had what it took to do whatever I wanted to do. And I knew that my parents worked hard. I knew that they loved us, and I also could see their resilience. I could see their strength. I could see their perseverance. I could see their flaws and their weaknesses. And I think I felt like from a pretty young age that I was pretty lucky, all in all. And so as I've grown older, that's become even more true because now I see them not just as my parents, but as human beings. And I see the challenges that they have overcome in their lives. I see the work that they have put into creating the family that they have. I have three siblings. We're all very close. I see the work that they've put into their marriage and making that work because, like, all the odds were against them. All the odds were against them. And, here they are, married 56 years. And yeah, I just think they're amazing. I think they're incredible humans.
Let's add your skating coach to the list.
My skating coach, my parents were kind of hard asses, but my skating coach was a hard ass. Really in the sense that, kind of stereotypical, like a lot of yelling, a lot of like not a lot of empathy, not a lot of gentleness. And so I don't know, I think it just kind of, helped me to have a thicker skin. I didn't take things personally. I never felt like it was personal. I just kind of felt like, she was a little bit of a cranky person. And I didn't think that that reflected on me in any way. And I feel like, years of skating under her tutelage, just kind of really added to that resilience. So she, is as weird as it seems like today at 55 years old to think back to somebody who, I skated with for maybe 6 years as a young person, like really formative years. So she did have a pretty big impact.
We've got a couple others on the list. Tell us about your grandfathers.
Yeah. So I already mentioned my grandpa on my dad's side, who was a nature lover, deeply connected to animals and to the earth. He was also the custodian at my school when I was in elementary school. So I saw him on a very regular basis. And I just thought he was the coolest. And he was pretty cool. Like, he's pretty cool. And so I just love to be around him. I love to be around him. And then my grandpa on my mom's side was quite different. He was a deep thinker. He read incessantly. Like he just you know absorbed books by looking at them, basically. And he had different interests. He was really into music, and my family are huge music appreciators. We are not musicians, but like very, very deep appreciation for music and lots of different kinds of music. He was into that. He was a collector. I feel like he was just a thinker. And so I had this like really, connected to nature, kind of outdoorsy grandpa. And then I had this grandpa who, I would sit around a table with him and he would like take me through his stamp collection. And so they just both were really present in my life when I was young. And I really felt very seen by both of them. Like I really felt like I wasn't just there, I was there with them.
Last one, your vice principal.
Yeah. So I had this vice principal, and God, I can't remember his last name right now. I'm just like I'm like, what was his name? Anyway, he was a little bit like how I just described my grandparents. I felt really seen by him. I don't know what it was. He came to my school when I was in grade 9. We both started at the school together. He happened to be my science teacher. We just kind of clicked. And it wasn't because I was like a super academic person. I wasn't. I did what I had to do to kind of, get through with half decent marks and not get in trouble. And he and I just really liked each other. And like, funny story, I think it was when I was in grade 12 and I got my license. And a friend of mine and I, one day, I was like, we're in a small town. The small town had just gotten a McDonald's. And we're like, we should go to McDonald's for lunch. Wish we had a car. And I was like, let me go ask Mr. I can't remember his last name, Mr. So-and-so, if I can take his car. I'm thinking this is a huge joke. Like, this is going to be hilarious, right? And so we go into his office and we talk to him. And I'm like, hey, do you think I could borrow your car so we could go to McDonald's? And he actually gave me his car.
That would never
And we
happen
drove
today.
to McDonald's. Yeah, no, right? I mean, that's what my kids say. My kids are like, that would never happen today, Mom. But yeah, so we went to McDonald's. That's just the kind of guy he was. In my high school, we had this thing which was like a kind of like a Freaky Friday type thing. I can't remember what we called it, but it was a swap where the grade 13 students for a day swapped roles with a teacher. And so they taught that class or whatever it was.
This sounds
And
like an
I
episode
switched
of
roles
Saved
with
by the
him.
Bell. Literally, I think there
Is
was
it?
there was an episode of Saved by the Bell where Mr. Belding and Zach Morris swapped places, and so did the teachers. And it was what made this episode interesting is that the wrestling team, or it was the football team, did something that, or no, their grades weren't good enough to go out and play, and so Zach had to make a call as a principal to say, hey, some of you guys can't go out there and play because you haven't passed this test. And so he learned exactly what Mr. Belding has to deal with. It was one of those episodes where the overarching theme was really empathy more than anything else. But that's what it totally sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. So that's it. I was the vice principal for the day. He was my guy. We did the switch. So yeah, I just, again, I felt really seen by him. He just knew me in a way that we connected in a way that I just didn't with most of my teachers. I mean, there were other people in my I want to say years of education where I connected, but he would just seem he's a special guy.
Looking back at some of your very first jobs, I want to talk about teaching skating lessons because, I mean, you're obviously qualified to teach the skating lessons, but as someone who was with a coach that demanded excellence from her, what were you like as a skating instructor? Like, did you ever have to pull yourself back and go, we just want to make sure they don't fall. They just want to get from one end of the rink to the next. That's what they're paying me to do. They're not paying me to lap the rink at any rate or anything like that. But did you find that your coach's influenced the way you taught people, directly or indirectly?
Interesting question. I don't think consciously it did. I don't recall it consciously coming up for me that I wanted to be like her or not like her in any way. But I would say we were very different because, well, first of all, she was coaching competitive skaters. So she was really pushing people. I was teaching learn to skate beginners. And I'm just a lot more about fun. So I just really wanted people to have fun. I wanted them to want to come back and be on the ice. I wanted them to get the basics. So I would be just a little bit more about community and fun, and she would have been a lot more about technique and dedication and discipline. Yeah.
One other job I want to touch on is telemarketing for Western University. Was this your first taste of sales?
It might have been. I mean, I worked at KFC and I had other summer jobs that, yeah, I don't think any of them had a real sales aspect to them. This is certainly my first cold calling. Yeah, yeah. Picking up the phone, dialing, and saying, "Hi, would you like to give money to the Western Alumni Association?" Yeah, that would have been, yeah, that's my first foray into sales.
So you were calling alumni asking for donations then?
Yeah, but mostly their parents because alumni didn't live with their parents anymore, and those were the numbers we had.
Oh,
So I ended up
interesting.
talking to yeah, I ended up talking to so and so's dad or mom because they don't live there anymore, but that's the number that we had on file for them.
When I was back at Brock University, there was sort of a debate as to whether or not there should be a cutoff when you don't call people, like a sort of a window after graduation, because some of the feedback that I had heard from my peers that had done a similar job to you was that they would call someone maybe a year or 2 years after graduation, and their response would be like, I just graduated. I gave you how much money for 4 years and now you want more? Or I'm still paying off university. I'm not prepared to do that. And so the feeling was that they were leaving a bad taste in the mouth of a future donor. So I don't know if they ever actually instituted some sort of moratorium officially or otherwise, but it was something that people had thought about.
No, I think we would have already had it in play because the parents, in my memory, Victor, were mostly quite kind, even if they were saying no. And I don't ever recall anybody being like, I just graduated, I'm still paying off loans or anything like that. It was mostly that they were already like really working and making some money. Whether they gave or not, that was another thing. But I think maybe they had already decided we're not calling people within 5 years or something like that.
Was it easy for you to pick up and move on to the next call if someone said no, thank you?
Yeah, I didn't find it too hard. I didn't find it too hard.
So speaking of Western University, you've already mentioned that you attended there. Why did you choose to study specifically at King's College? And what did you do your BA in?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So, like now we're going to get into like how my life was mostly on autopilot for many, many years, not a lot of thought and background on things. So, I did a degree in history. And I chose history because primarily, like I'm going to be honest with you, no bullshit. There was a girl on my precision skating team. She was a few years older than me. I thought she was really cool, and she was studying history. She was in university and she was studying history. I didn't know, Victor, what I wanted to do. Neither one of my parents had gone past high school. My mom didn't even graduate high school. By the way, she subsequently, after I graduated from Western and King's, went to university, went to King's and got a degree. But I had no guidance. I had nobody in my family on either side of my family, not just my parents, no aunts and uncles, nobody had gone to university. So I didn't know. I was just like figuring it all out as I went. So this girl was cool. I thought she was pretty neat. Oh, history, that sounds interesting. Um, King's College, I'm not Catholic. It's a Catholic college. I chose King's College because somebody else that I knew was going to go to Western and was looking at King's College. She happened to be Catholic. What I liked about it and why I even considered it is because it was smaller. It was not a main campus college. It was a smaller campus. It had smaller classes. I thought that might be a little bit better fit for me. But like funny story around even choosing that when, I had only applied to the three schools. I applied to Wilfrid Laurier, I applied to McMaster, I applied to King's at Western. I got into all three. I had no idea which one would be the best. I did eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And my mother made me sign an affidavit that said I would not come back and complain to her if I hated it because I had chosen it so randomly. True story.
Do you think studying history has helped you in sales? Because a lot of history is storytelling, and that's what a good sales professional does, is that they're very good at taking even the most boring detail and building an appropriate story around it.
Hmm. Interesting question. I think there may be some of that. I do love stories. I love historical fiction. I love, and some of the people who have worked with me in, particularly my time at Olive Media, and when I was working with a team who would do presentations to our partner side. So call it the New York Times or Time Inc. or one of these other big media partners that we worked with. And we would do presentations to them. And I really like to build a story throughout that presentation. And I was really probably, much to their chagrin and frustration, very fixated on how we told that story. Words matter. I've always said this, words matter.
Yes, I
And
agree.
so we should pick our words with intention, because if we say this, it might be it might be interpreted this way, and if we say this same thing but said in a different way, it might be interpreted like this. So yeah, I think you're probably right. It probably did have an impact.
After graduation, you worked in retail for a year, but the one thing I want to talk about is moving to Japan to teach English. Let's jump to that point. How much culture shock did you experience coming from Strathroy? And I understand London is not a small town as well, but compared to anything in Japan, you must have felt like you were in a different reality.
It was bananas. It was absolutely bananas. And in fact, so much so that I didn't think I could do it and I tried to quit and come home. So yeah, we're talking
Really, was that
pre-internet.
overwhelming?
This was, yeah, yeah. I didn't know anything about the Far East. I don't know, maybe I'd read Shogun at that point. So a little bit of historical fiction. But I mean, we didn't have internet. We didn't have exposure to things that we have exposure to today. I think I'd maybe been to one Japanese restaurant in my life, and it probably was really faux Japanese anyway. Um, so, I had graduated. It was the height of a recession. I worked in retail, running a store for a couple of years while going back to the career center at Western every once in a while to see if there was anything interesting coming up. And there were always these overseas teaching jobs. And I just kind of got to the point where I was like, well, I could go back to teachers college. I could maybe think about a career in law. I don't know. I owe a lot of money in student loans. And then I was like, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should go make some money overseas and I should teach at the same time. And well, I picked Japan because it seemed the least foreign of the foreign places that were hiring. And I got there and I was not prepared for how different society was or how different the world was there. And it really shook me. I was actually quite physically ill. I couldn't eat. Um, and I lost something like 15 pounds in the first couple of weeks because literally everything that I tried to put in my mouth made me feel nauseous. So I had a really, really hard time in the beginning. Um, and then I thought, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this isn't for me. And I told my bosses that. Like, I also didn't know what I was doing, Victor. Like, I accepted a job with a company. The organization was called English Academy for Children. I thought it was a school. And I went there. And what it was a husband and wife who brought over university graduates from Australia and from Canada, and then contracted them out to private schools. And I would drive every day to a different school and teach. So I didn't have I didn't even do that in the small town where they lived. I was isolated by myself in a town about an hour and a half from where they were centered, and I would drive every day to a different school and go from classroom to classroom, 30-minute classes, teaching these little kids. It was adorable. It was private nursery schools and kindergarten. So the students were like age 3 to 6. And I would go and I would teach them. I was incredibly isolated. I couldn't read anything, even in a grocery store, trying to go buy groceries. I didn't have a device in my hand to try and translate everything and look it up. It's all in characters, so it's not like I can go to a dictionary like I might do in France. It was a really big shift. I tried to quit, and my mom, who is like no guff kind of gal, was like, no, you're not. You signed a contract. You're not coming home. You're staying there and you're fulfilling that contract. And I was like, yeah, well, then I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. So, okay, fine. And then she arrived 2 days later.
Oh, she came to look after you.
She came to make sure I wasn't going to have a nervous breakdown, is what she did. And she came, and, I mean, I'll get all emotional even thinking about her coming over, because she just said, I'm going to get there no matter what. I'm going to make sure she's okay. She did that. She left. I stayed a year and a half.
How long did she
Yeah.
stay with you, and was it difficult to say goodbye?
Now you really want me to cry. Now you're really trying to make me cry. She stayed a week, and we fought pretty much every day. And I took a few days off and, showed her around. And my employers were amazing. They were like, who is this woman? Like, this is crazy. This woman's amazing. Look at her. She just came here, and like less than 48 hours, here she is. And she is taking no shit from anybody. And we drove around. I showed her the sites that I knew after having been there for, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks. We fought about me coming home or not coming home. And by the end of the week, she was going home and I was staying. And she left on Mother's Day.
Do
And
you
I took her to the airport and I said to her, Mom, please don't go. And she said, I have to go. I said, but I need you. And she said, but I have people at home who need me more. And she left. And I stood there and bawled my eyes out. And even today, as you can see, it's emotional. But holy shit, talk about strength. And then I did it. I bucked up, plowed through, persevered. Perseverance became my word. And, that word is still a word that I turn to today.
do you look back at that year and a half and go, I would be a less resilient person had I not gone through that, had my mother not pushed me to fulfill my contract?
Oh, Victor, TSN turning point in my life. 100% TSN turning point. Like, I came out of that thinking I can pretty much do anything. Like, here I am driving through Japan by myself. Now, I'll add, I wasn't entirely by myself. I did have a boyfriend at the time who later came, and he also worked for the company that I was with. But, still on my own in my car, driving, looking at Mount Fuji, thinking, if I can do this, I can do anything. If I can do this, I can do anything. And I came home and, I lived in my parents' basement. They'd given my bedroom away. I hadn't been home for how many years? I don't know at this point. 5, 6, 7, maybe. They made me a makeshift bedroom in the basement. I was there for 2 months, and then I moved to Toronto. Started working at the Financial Post.
We're going to take a quick break. Enjoying this episode? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Complement your listening experience by subscribing to the Media People newsletter at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or at mediapeople.beehive.com. It's a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or mediapeople.beehive.com. And this is where your media career kicks off. So talk to us about the Financial Post. How did you find the role, and why did you choose to get into media? Because at this point, studied history, teaching English. How does that become the next step?
A lot like most of the stuff that I had done to that point, it was not with a great deal of thought. I had some acquaintances, so friends, light friends that were working at the Financial Post. I had reacquainted with them when I came home from Japan. I saw them that summer, and they said, you should come work at the Financial Post. It's a lot of fun. It's awesome here. You should come. And I applied and I got a job. Like, there wasn't a lot more into it than that. I'd already done sales. I had already been selling in retail. I'd already done telemarketing sales. And this was an inside sales role at a newspaper. And so I packed up my bags and I moved to Toronto, and I started, doing telephone sales at the Financial Post. And it was a fantastic place to work. I loved it. It was a it was kind of like still the heyday of newspaper when I was there. Um, Digital had not hit the newspaper industry, and we had a lot of fun. It had a lot of amazing people who are still dear to me today, good friends. I learned a lot. I started, I had run a store in retail, so I had been managing people there. But I moved into like kind of my first leadership role in a corporate setting when I worked at the Financial Post. I had a lot of pivotal experiences there. When I was at the Financial Post, it was it was taken over, was sold to Southam, and Southam launched the National Post around the financial section, which became the Financial Post. And so I lived through a pretty interesting time. I was part of a team of leaders at the Financial Post who went through what was, a lot of ambiguity, a lot of upheaval, a lot of change. Most of the leaders left during that time, mostly not of their own choice. It was just part of what happens when two organizations or when an organization buys another. And then I was part of the team that was at the National Post when we launched it. And so that was pretty cool. I had a lot of really um, amazing experiences in that part of my career that I think are unique, maybe unique at that time anyway.
Was it an easy adjustment when Southam bought the National Post? Because sometimes, like you said, when you're part of an acquisition, things change. Some leaders have to move on, but the culture also changes as well, too. Did you find that it was more or less the same place to work at, or did things change?
Things changed big time. It was very different. It was a very different culture than the Financial Post was small. Financial Post was a small organization. It was part of Sun Media at the time. So it was also, culturally, there was influence from Sun Media. It was a lot of fun. It was small. It had a very familial sense to it. And Southam was a big company. I mean, it was a big company that had a much more corporate sense to it. Uh, I wouldn't call it familial in its culture. So yeah, it was very different, and there was a lot of adjustment for me in that change. But again, perseverance, resiliency, curiosity, open mindedness. I was willing to give it a go and be a part of something new. And I guess I just had the fortitude to be able to make my way through that change.
Speaking of new, CANOE.ca, or at least it was new back then. Was this your first foray into digital media?
Yeah, Canoe was. I had been wanting to move into digital for some time. And then I had left the National Post and gone to Canoe. And yeah, it was kind of like returning to Sun Media in some ways, but Sun Media had now been bought out by Quebecor, so not quite Sun Media. Yeah, so it was my first foray into digital.
And then from there, you went on to Microsoft MSN Canada. So you were monetizing that page everyone landed at after they logged out of their Hotmail. That's how I discovered
When I
MSN.ca.
MSN when I joined was essentially a homepage and Hotmail. That's right. And and so I was taking a bit of a gamble. I mean, it was a great brand to join, but there wasn't a lot to sell. But that changed fairly quickly. And yeah, I ended up spending 6 years at MSN in total. Those years split between MSN.ca and Simpatico MSN. Again, another period of a lot of change, kind of just trusting that things would work out okay when there was no guarantees of anything. Like, I would say that my um I acquired the ability to manage through ambiguity because I worked in two organizations where there was a significant change in structure and the business itself, both with that change from the Financial Post to the National Post, and then the change from MSN to Simpatico MSN.
You bring up ambiguity. I've been in a couple of situations in my career where things have become, I guess you could sort of say, ambiguous because maybe there's been management change at the top or one company's bought the other. And I've found, using hindsight, that the best skill you can have is emotional intelligence. Like it's always a great skill to have on the job, but this is when your peers start to panic, and this is where you can't panic with them. Like you can't be infused with that because then you become part of the problems that come with this sort of culture shift, I find.
I would agree. I would agree. And I mean, call it emotional intelligence, just call it self leadership might be another way to
Yeah,
think
that's a good way of looking
about
at it
it.
too.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, how do I want to show up in this situation? Who do I want to, what voices, not who, what voices do I want to listen to in this situation? Because you're right. I mean, it's human nature. A lot of people panic. A lot of people do not like change and they resist it. They lash out, they get angry because they're fearful. And they start to see leadership as being evil is too big of a word, but not good in some way, right? They start to really blame leadership. And it is in those situations where I have always like just taken a step back and be like, okay, what's really happening here? Like, how bad is it? Where is there some good? Where do I see possibilities in
Yes,
this?
right there. Where can you add value?
Yeah, yeah. And what am I prepared to navigate through? Like if it's not good for me, then it's time to leave. If it's not healthy, then it's time to leave. But if it's just like, okay, what might I learn from this? What might be in this that I might be able to grow from? Okay, then maybe I'll stick around and see how that plans out.
You started as an account executive with MSN Canada. Then you were promoted to business development manager before taking on director of sales. So let's start with the business development manager role. How did your duties change from being an AE?
Yeah, that was a pretty dramatic change, right? AE was working with primarily media agencies in Canada, strategists, directors, media planners, and buyers. And then moving into the business development role, the manager of business development, I actually shifted out of the Canadian market. I wasn't working with Canadian media companies anymore. I was now working with larger content players or international advertisers. And so this was really at the time of MSN and Simpatico coming together, and our sales organization shifted from being an MSN sales team to the Simpatico sales team. Simpatico was responsible for Canadian sales. And so I shifted into this other role, which was we call it business development, which I think today has much more of like BD has much more of a kind of pre-sales feel to it, and is very connected to technology business development. But the role that I was in was very much a partnerships role. So I was really creating partnerships with like content partners who might be the provider of content for a channel within the Simpatico MSN network. Or another example is, from an international advertiser standpoint, I worked with my counterpart at MSN in India around the launch of ICICI Bank, which is an India based bank in Canada, and their entry into the Canadian marketplace. So, because they were outside of Canada, because they were already an MSN client, that fell into the territory of work that I was doing at Simpatico MSN. So it was very, very different from the role that I had been in before.
Your promotion to director of sales. Before we get into the duties, tell us how you snagged this promotion while you were on maternity leave. Because
Mm.
people will get these when they come back or before, but I've never heard of anyone getting a promotion while they're on maternity leave. And did you have to come off maternity leave immediately to accept it?
Yeah, I did not, is the short answer to that. Yeah, I was really lucky. I worked with some incredible people when I was at MSN. And early in my pregnancy, actually, is when I was promoted into the manager of business development. I was actually on bed rest at home. So I wasn't even in the office. I had been put on bed rest at home in the first trimester of my pregnancy. And I
Mm.
got a call from my boss at the time, who was a guy named Mike Sharma. Mike Sharma's still in the industry. He would be a fantastic person for you to speak to, by the way. He runs a small agency called Society, etc. But he was running the sales org at MSN at the time. And he offered me a promotion into this BD role, and I accepted. And so after that month of bed rest, I went back to work. I worked in this role for the remainder of my pregnancy, and then when I was on mat leave, like a year and a bit later, because I was off for a little extra, um, I got another call from Mike. Actually, it might not have been Mike. It might have been Mike's boss at the time, a guy named Gordon Jakubik. And Gordon reached out and offered me a role as the sales director. Mike was leaving. I was coming back maybe in, I want to say 2 months, and maybe a month and a half. And I accepted, and they said, okay, so when you come back, this will be the role you come back into.
I always ask this question of anyone who's climbed the sales ladder, or any ladder for that matter. But especially in sales, people like the thrill of the hunt. They like getting their hands dirty. But as you climb that ladder, you're less and less likely to do that. So you become more of a coach rather than a player. Was that a difficult transition for you?
I would say I am not typical in that regard. Um, I would say that throughout my sales career, and I was successful in sales, but I was probably always more of a farmer than I was a hunter. I've always been more of a deep relationship builder, and more about growing the business than hunting for the business. And I don't even actually think of my progression in my career as a ladder in any way. I really see it as a web. I really moved all over the place in many different directions, from people management and leadership into individual contributor, back into this, back into that. Like, I moved back and forth a few times, and I did not find the shift into managing a team to be challenging. I had managed before in different roles, so that kind of coach role from a leadership perspective um, came kind of naturally to me, and I loved it. Like, that's what I wanted to be doing. I had taken these individual contributor roles when I moved into digital, but I'd been managing a team for like 5 years before I moved to CANOE. And I made the individual contributor shift because I felt like that would be the best way to get into digital, to go into a sales role. So it didn't feel like it was a massive shift for me, and it in fact felt quite natural.
What brought you to Olive Media, and what did your role as director of audience entail?
When I returned to Microsoft after my mat leave, um, I was in this really unique role where I was director of sales at MSN, but our sales were essentially happening at Simpatico. So I was really leading a team of people who were supporting the sales team. And working at Microsoft, I mean, amazing that I had these incredible opportunities there. It was a fantastic organization. I learned so much there. Um, but it's an international enterprise. and I did a lot of travel. And, in my first 6 months back into work after my mat leave, I had gone on 9 trips. I had been to London, I had been to Germany, I had been to Brazil, I had been to New York and Seattle and Florida. And like I was just gone too much. And I saw ahead of me Cannes, and I saw ahead of me a Microsoft conference that I was going to be at for like, I don't know, 5 days. And I was just like, what? I got a baby at home. My wife was pregnant with our second child at the time. And I could see this just was not going to work for me. I just don't want to do this. And I still was kind of not connected to the Canadian market any longer, right? So I had shifted into this BD role a few years prior, and I was now leading, but I wasn't actually in contact with the Canadian media environment so much because that was really what we had Simpatico doing. They were responsible for that. And I was kind of like, maybe this is my time to get back in here, and maybe I will find a new place to kind of do that. And I just happened to be having lunch with Christy Painting one day, and she and I had been on the Ad Club Internet Day committee years before. I had chaired that committee, and Christy had been on that committee with me, and so we were having lunch, and she had just come back from a mat leave, and I was sharing this with her, and she said, "If you're serious, I might have something for you at Olive." And so I left Microsoft and I joined Olive. And yeah, that was a fantastic move. Olive is like for sure a major highlight in my career. I spent 8 years there.
And how small was Olive when you started?
Yeah, I was number 19 joining Olive, 19. So we were 19 people in a basement space on King Street.
Let's back up a second, just in case, because unfortunately Olive is no longer with us. Anyone listening to this is wondering what Olive Media is. Give us kind of the Coles Notes or the elevator pitch as to what Olive Media was, who they were owned by, and the problem they were trying to solve in the Canadian market.
Yeah, yeah. Olive was when I joined it. It was a business that was launched underneath the umbrella of Torstar Digital, which was the digital arm of Torstar. And very shortly after I joined there, it became a partnership between Torstar Digital and uh, Jessica, which is the company that was um, a cousin, relative, parent. I'm not even sure what the relationship was with La Presse. So then we were owned by two large Canadian media companies, Torstar, Toronto Star, and La Presse. And we were really, the problem that we were solving was kind of twofold, Victor. The first one was we were making it really easy for Canadian media buyers and brands and marketers to access Canadian audiences on non-Canadian properties. So it was difficult to reach the Canadian audience on, say, people.com, because you had to reach out to a US company, a US sales rep. They didn't have time or day for a Canadian media buyer. So that was half of the solution. The other half of the solution was we were a solution to US and international properties who had substantial Canadian audiences and wanted to monetize those, because they really weren't, it was spillage in the US. They didn't get money from it from their US advertisers. It wasn't a great experience for their Canadian audiences. And so we came in to say, listen, let us do that for you. Let's find a way to carve off this audience, these impressions, whatever these ad products you have are, and we'll be your team in Canada. And that was actually the part of the business that I built and grew, and where my heart really was at Olive. So I led the side of the business that was growing those partnerships. So that kind of harks back to my time at MSN, right? And building those partnerships that I did in that business development role.
Let's go through all the different roles that you had there. So actually, we'll get up to president. So you were VP of product, general manager, and vice president of product, and then El Presidente. So passing those, when you made the jump to president, what did that role entail? Because now you're leading the company, but what does it look like to actually lead the company from the top? And what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. Oh, good questions. Let me just start by saying, like, last night I went to the Empower Her event. Are you familiar with this organization, Empower Her partnership
I've seen it on
between?
LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah. So, it is a group of women that have gotten together to create these events to support women in the media industry. Anyway, last night's event was on imposter syndrome. So, if you want to talk about imposter syndrome, let's just talk about moving from like this VP role into this co-GM role. So, when I joined Olive Media, Simon Jennings, who is the CRO over at Pelmorex right now, was the GM at Olive Media. Then he became president. He became president. I became a VP. Christy Painting became a VP, and then we had Andrew Wicken, who's at Google, who was also a VP. And we were VPs under Simon. Simon's a character. If you don't know him, he's amazing. He's larger than life. And so he had a really big role in shaping the culture and shaping who and what Olive was. When Simon left, Christy and I were promoted to be co-GMs. So, like, that's essentially saying we need two people to fill the shoes of this guy. Now, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is these are two amazing leaders. We don't want to lose either of them. We really probably want them both to be in senior leadership role here. Let's give it to both of them. And by the way, it was not uncommon. There were a number of businesses within the Torstar digital umbrella that had co-leadership like that. And so Christy and I became co-GM, and then Christy left and I was promoted to president. And so, talk about imposter syndrome through those moves, like, okay, so here's two of us to fill this role. And now Christy leaves and there's like, okay, now I'm doing it on my own. And, there was a part of me that was like, holy shit. And there was a part of me that was like, yes, now I get to make this my own thing. I can just I felt like a sense of freedom to be the leader that I wanted to be. Not that Christy held me back from that in any way. I held myself back from that. I was, in a place of collaboration that just didn't allow me to be as creative and as maybe as quick around things, though Christy's very quick to move, as I was when it was just me on my own. And Olive was going through a lot of change. There was a lot of change in the marketplace in our early days. There were fewer competitors, while there were still big ones like Simpatico MSN and AOL. The market was fragmented, incredibly fragmented when I took over the presidency. And now we're into the era of ad tech in a big way. Programmatic is everywhere. And, so we were in a place that was like really a lot of change. And so there were a lot of changes that we were making at Olive. And so, it was just, how did it change? How did my leadership change it? It's interesting. I think we just had to grow up in a way, it was just like, now we're at a place where we've been in the market for a while. We've established ourselves. We have created expectations. And now it's time for us to continue to mold this business and shape it into what is required for the future. Unfortunately, that lasted for a few years, and then things changed again, and we ended up closing Olive.
Were you part of the team when Olive closed?
I led that, in fact, and strangely enough, Victor, I would say that winding down Olive Media is a highlight in my career. Olive was a profitable company. It wasn't without its challenges. The market was changing drastically. And when we closed Olive, really what had been happening was, you might remember La Presse stopped printing a newspaper and they did an iPad only version of their newspaper.
I remember that.
And with that, yeah, really bold, really big, bold, like, swing for the fences kind of move. And with that, they pulled out of the Olive partnership because now their sales team was only digital, right? And we had been their digital sales team up until that point, and then they had their newspaper sales team. And now that they had no newspaper, they're like, okay, so like we don't need anybody else to do this for us anymore. We're taking a swing for the fences. We're going to take this back in-house. We're going to do it ourselves. And with that decision, it really left quite a gaping hole in what was Olive Media, because La Presse was a big part of our business. And at the same time, Torstar was like, kind of figuring out what the heck are we going to do. And they decided at that time that they would not move forward with Olive Media as a separate digital entity anymore. And so we closed it. They took their star sales back in, and we let our partners know, you're going to have to find new partners in Canada because we're not going to be doing this anymore. And, why is it a highlight for me? It's a highlight for me because I feel like that sort of decision and that sort of wind down could be disastrous. It could have been so messy and so ugly and so painful for so many people. And I made it my mission to close Olive in the way that we had always been at Olive. And that was with transparency and with care and with compassion and with partnership and support at the forefront. And so, I rallied my team of leaders together and said, this is what's happening. And here's what I want us to do. And if you can do this, great. If it's not for you and you want to leave, that's okay too. We'll support you in that. You can do that. But I would love it if you were here to help us do this. And, I feel like we did right by our people at Olive. I feel like we did right by our customers and our clients in the Canadian media landscape. And I feel like we did right by our partners, both in the US and in Europe.
The kind of the visual metaphor or analogy that pops into my head as you were telling the story was that it felt like you were a pilot and you just found out that your plane lost an engine and your job was to safely land the plane that could crash at any moment. Would you say that that's an accurate depiction, or am I completely way off?
Victor, thank you for that. I think that is very accurate. Absolutely. And like I could have had people jumping out the windows, right? Like, oh my God, we're all gonna die, No, that didn't happen. That's a great analogy. Great metaphor.
And unfortunately, with Olive sunsetting, so did their wonderful parties. That's something we've got to throw out there. Every time I have an Olive alumnus on the podcast, I always throw a nod to the parties because I don't think we could have those anymore.
Yeah,
Yes.
we had epic parties. And one of the best things about our parties were, it just, again, back to what Olive was about, is how inclusive they were. And we invited our competitors and our media partners. We had we had partners fly in from the US to come to our parties. We had obviously all of our customers and our clients. Yeah, we had so much fun there.
I want to touch on something that you've been very good at, and that is securing a series of promotions within the companies that you've worked at. And so, what advice would you give to someone listening to this that says, hey, you know what? I don't want to move to another company. I'd rather grow within the company I'm at. I'm very happy where I'm at, but they're kind of unsure as to what that next step is. So, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. And I would say, I think you should just always be showing up as a leader. And as best you can, you should be showing up as your next level leader. So, leadership has been a thread for me through all of this, through so much of my career and leading people, but even in my individual contributor roles, showing up with ideas, showing up with opinions, contributing, uh, making sure that I had a voice that was creating a positive impact. I didn't actually pursue a lot of these promotions. I feel really, really fortunate that I worked for incredible leaders who um, were my advocates, who saw some kind of potential and presented me with opportunities. So, and I think that what they saw was that I cared, that I didn't react, right? I think like I did have that EQ that was required to like kind of withstand some of the pressure where, somebody with a little less awareness might, get a little bit shaky, a little rocky. And so I think that just always served me really well.
Your next role was at Tribal Scale, and you were their VP of Global Business Development. Let's talk a little bit about this one because you're not shy to say that there just wasn't a fit between yourself and the organization.
Hmm. Yeah. When I left Olive, I actually started a small venture with some co-founders, and I did that for a couple of years as I was searching for my next thing. I kind of took like basically a year off thinking, what do I want to do? Right? Like, really, what do I want to do next? And in that time off, I had someone who came to me and said, I've got this idea. What do you think of it? Do you want to go in on it? And I said, yes. And I said, yes. But here's the thing, I'm also pursuing this, and this is what I think I want to do next. And what that was is I really wanted to shift away from media and really move more into the tech ecosystem and really more the innovation economy. So I really wanted to be a part of building startups and the startup economy and ecosystem in Canada. Olive had been a startup when I was there in that basement space. And there's something about being a part of that type of organization that I really loved. And so I got really focused on finding a role within the innovation economy. And I just was like, okay, I don't know. I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. Other opportunities. No, I was really focused on this. And eventually I landed this role. Actually, Kirsten Stewart, who you might recognize her name from Twitter and from the CBC.
Yep.
Kirsten Stewart was at Tribal Scale, and she brought me into this role. And she left very shortly after. I had already been talking to Tribal Scale about a year earlier, and they're a software innovation firm. And they kind of have an agency model. I didn't really understand it, Victor, at the time. Like when I went there, I didn't understand how that worked because I'd always been in sales organizations on the other side of the business. Um, but, there were things that, I had some people say, I don't know, Theresa, I kind of know that organization. I don't know if that's your kind of place. And I was like, no, yeah, it's definitely, I'm really excited about it. I really want to do this. So I went in and I kind of feel like I just had blinders on. And I had a focus. This is what I was going to do. This is the kind of company I want to be in. I found one. I got the role and I went. And it was a misfire. Culturally, it wasn't a good fit. And even the role itself was not a good fit. It was called business development, but it wasn't the business development that I had been doing at Olive. It wasn't the business development that I had been doing at Microsoft. It was software sales. And not even software sales, because again, it was a software innovation firm. But you know what? Ultimately, I wasn't the right fit for the role, and the role wasn't the right fit for me, and I wasn't the right fit for the organization. And values alignment just wasn't there. I really want to, I'm very much about culture. I'm very much about culture. I'm very much about giving people opportunities to grow. I really want to support people in, creating the kind of environment where they can best thrive. And this was a startup. They were just like, we got to do this. We got to do this. And it's kind of like, let's just do it. There wasn't enough time to slow down, just to be thoughtful about how we were creating things. So it was just a misfire. And, in many ways, I just think I was pushing for something and I wasn't listening to the signs from the universe. So after that, I was like, okay, now what? Now I really need to kind of like take a step back and think, what next? Because I don't want to make that mistake again.
Well, let's bring everything full circle. Where did the idea for the LeaderSmith come from?
I had been interviewing at a variety of different places, and someone from media, in fact, Mike Sharma, who was running his own agency, had reached out to me and he said, T, would you be interested in coming in and doing something like this for my team? It was some work that we had done at Microsoft together. And it was around, kind of professional development stuff. And at the time I said, no. I said, no, Mike, I got these other things going on. I got this other venture that I'm working on, and I can't. But thank you for thinking of me. And then, I did Tribal Scale. I left Tribal Scale, and I was like, I think that what I want to do is really more focused around the people. It's really more focused around leadership. Like Victor, I think most of us have experienced in our careers, if you've been in your career for any length of time, great leadership, good leadership. You've probably had some pretty crappy leadership here and there too. And I felt like I had experienced all those things. And I think for the most part, I was a pretty good leader. Not always. I had my moments. We're all human. We all mess up here and there. We all fall out of alignment and things like that. So it wasn't like it was all sunshine and puppy dogs. But for the most part, I did a pretty good job. And I thought, you know what? That's what I want to do. I've always just really got so much satisfaction, enjoyment, helping people be their best selves at work and do their best work, make their greatest impact. And because I had been a senior leader for so many years, I had done that primarily with other leaders. So my direct reports were leaders. They were often leaders of leaders. So I was like, okay, so maybe there's something here that I want to do. And so then I was like, oh yeah, remember when Mike asked me to do that thing? So I called him up and I said, listen, I want to ask you some questions. I want to ask you some questions about that thing that you asked me about a year ago. Tell me a bit about it. What ended up, like, who did you bring in? What did they do? What was that about? And so he shared a lot with me. Mike and I have a close relationship. And I said, I could have done that. And he said, you not only could have done it, you probably could have done it better, and you probably could have done it in less time. And I was like, I'm thinking about doing this. And he said, if you do that, I want to be one of your first customers. I want to bring you in. I want you to do some stuff with my team. And that was like fuel to my fire. And so, it was the beginning of conversations really around what I would call product market fit. I started to tell people, this is what I'm thinking about doing. These are the kinds of things that I want to focus on. These are the types of problems I want to help solve. Do you see these types of challenges within your organization? And can you see yourself bringing in someone like me to support on that? And I got a lot of yeses. So I felt like I had product market fit. And I had other people that, not unlike Mike, said, I would love to work with you on this. I'd love to bring you in, or I would love you to be my coach. And so that was it. There became the LeaderSmith. And that was 5 years ago, this coming November.
I like what you said about the different types of bosses, like bosses that were great, not so great, and just, I don't know if you use the term horrible, but basically three
I said
buckets.
crappy.
Crappy.
Crappy ones.
And I've always reflected on bosses the same way. I didn't say it like that, but I would, because I learned by example quite a bit. And so I'd be like, I can learn something from all of my managers. Some of them I want to emulate, and some of them have taught me what not to do by virtue of their example. So I'm doing the opposite.
100%. Yeah. And I think, even if I don't have anything to learn from them, right? Like I've had some challenging bosses, and I'm thinking of one in particular that, like, there's really nothing about the way that this person, the way I experienced their leadership that I would want to emulate. But I did learn a lot about myself and the kind of leader that I wanted to be. So yeah, I think, we have something to learn, whether it's about ourselves, and it almost always is about ourselves, or if it's about, leadership in general.
Theresa, if anyone listening to this wants to talk to you further about the LeaderSmith, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they can certainly find me on LinkedIn. And I think what you will get from my LinkedIn posts. So if someone was to go to my LinkedIn profile, please don't try to get a sense of somebody from their LinkedIn profile. Go to their posts, right? Like if they're not posting, okay, then you're really not going to get anything. But like what you see in a profile is essentially a resume. You're not getting a sense of somebody there. I post a fair bit, sometimes video form, sometimes just, written content form. But they can certainly find me on LinkedIn. They can find me at my website, which is in need of an overhaul. And that is www.theleadersmith.ca. My email address is everywhere. So they can catch me by email, and that's Theresa@theleadersmith.ca.
This has been a fantastic chat. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Am I? Okay, hit me.
We'll find out. The campaign you're most proud of.
Okay, yeah. The campaign I'm most proud of, I'm going to say ICICI Bank. That was such a pivotal time and such an important campaign, and the coordination across continents was incredible. Yeah, I'm really, really proud of that particular launch.
I always ask my guests their favorite movie, but you don't have one, so I'm going to change the question up a little bit. What
Okay.
movie do you find yourself watching over and over again?
Okay. Um, okay, I've got two that come to mind, and neither of them are really my choice. My wife is a big fan of what I call cheesy comedies. So we have The Great Outdoors on, get this, DVD. And so we used to watch that every summer at the cottage. It would be our summer movie with the kids. So I can't tell you how many times I've watched The Great Outdoors. And then the other one that I can't count how many times I've watched, again, not because it's my go-to, but it's her go-to, is National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
This is a hard one. Like young me, current me. I'm going to go with an actor that can span all these things. And I think this actor, well, I know this actor is a little bit older than me even, but I'm going to go with I'm going to say Annette Bening. There have been times throughout my life where people have been like, you remind me of Annette Bening. And she's had a long career. And, I love her laugh. I love the way she shows up on camera. She can play serious. She can play fun. I feel like I am both those things as well. So I think that she would be a great actor to play Theresa Smith in Theresa Smith's life story.
My follow-up, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
I think we'd probably call it Figuring It Out, because I think like I'm just always figuring it out.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
We had that plane analogy from your days closing all of media. I'd say landing the plane safely. That could be your alternate title.
Hmm. Well, I like to think yeah, I guess so. But though I like to think the plane is still in flight in many ways.
Your favorite book?
You know what's
Oh,
Yeah, I
sorry.
would just
Go
want to say
ahead.
one more thing about that. This is not rapid fire all of a sudden. I'm going to stop you in that one. But there's going to be something too. There could be something, a theme that comes up for me on a regular basis is courage before confidence. So that might be the name of it as well, because I feel like I've done a lot of things just like kind of like, okay, I'm going to step into this. I don't know what I'm doing. This is where the figuring it out part comes. And I haven't had like so much confidence that this is going to be a success, but I've had the courage to go for it.
Your favorite book?
Yeah. I'm going to give you one of my favorite leadership books. I think this might appeal to a wide audience. The book is 11 Rings, and it's the Phil Jackson story. So it is a autobiography of sorts. I think he had a ghostwriter. He was the coach of the Chicago Bulls, the 11 Rings. He won 11 NBA rings. He's an amazing leader, and there are so many leadership lessons in that book. I absolutely loved it.
I am a big fan of biographies and autobiographies, so I'm definitely going to check that out. Thank you for the recommendation.
You're welcome.
Your favorite song?
Okay, this is a hard one. I already told you that I come from a family of, big music appreciation group here. So I like all music. I love all music, really. My favorite song kind of depends on the day. Today, my favorite song might be Peaceful Life by Guts. Yeah, I'm going to go with that.
The best advice you have ever received?
Be yourself.
My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
Victor, I'm doing it. I would be coaching. I would be focused on leadership development and helping leaders show up as their best selves, making their biggest impact. And because that's what makes my heart sing. That's what lights my fire.
And we're going to end things here. Theresa, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Victor. I really enjoyed this conversation.